I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and today we're going to talk about the Millett TRS-1 rifle scope. A bunch of you guys request that we review this scope. It's in the lower price point of scopes that we generally review, but I think a lot of you guys have already purchased one and want to know what we have to say about it, and some of you guys were actually looking at purchasing one. So here goes. Overall, we spent some time shooting this rifle scope, and there are some features on it that are adequate, and there are some features on it that are really confusing and I think will cause some problems for some new shooters. So let's go over the scope front to back, tell you what you get and what features you may have to look out for. First of all, the scope comes with these nice scope caps. It comes with a little velvet scope cover bag in it. It does not come with a mount. You do have to purchase a mount, and the mount that we're using here is a SALT mount from SWFA. It's a rebranded Burris mount, and it worked just fine for putting this on an AR type rifle. You'll want to go with regular 30mm rings if you're mounting this to a conventional rifle, not a semi-automatic gas gun. So we mounted this up to our AR, we took it out, we shot it, and I've been shooting rifle scopes for a little while, and my first magazine through with this scope really confused me. And the main reason why was a mix of the reticle and the magnification ring on it. Now this is a second focal plane rifle scope. What that means is that your reticle is only going to be correct at one power setting on your selector ring. As you change the power settings on the scope, the reticle will cover a different amount of your target. So the reticle will appear fixed in your field of view while the target grows or shrinks. This is pretty standard with second focal plane scopes. What's not standard is most second focal plane scopes will have the mil correct value at the maximum power. This is a 4:16 power scope, so you would naturally think that the reticle would be correct at 16 power. The reason for this is if you're using the reticle for range estimation, then you want to use it at maximum magnification because that's where your measurements are going to be most accurate and it's going to be most beneficial to you. Well, the TRS-1 steps aside from that a little bit, and its magnification is correct at 10 power. Now this causes two different problems. First of all, it's not a standard across the industry. It steps away from what everybody does. It's not really well marked that that is in fact where the reticle is correct. What they did do is on the power selector ring, they put a detent in. So as you turn the power selector ring, there's an audible and tactile click when you hit 10 power. The problem is it doesn't stop at 10 power. The click is not distinct enough to there's not a distinct enough notch to drop that power selector ring in. So there's a little bit of slop on either side of 10 power, and that changes the amount of target that your reticle covers. So you're not perfectly accurate. Second problem comes in that now you're not getting the most magnification. You're not going to be able to get the most accurate reading when you're measuring your target with your reticle. Most of us are not actually doing range estimation with reticles anymore. Laser rangefinders have gotten cheap enough that if you're in a situation where you need to range a target quickly, it's going to be more efficient to utilize a laser rangefinder. So that's not a great big huge drawback on the scope, but the fact that we're not perfect on that click is a big deal if you're using your reticle for elevation or wind holds, because then you're introducing error into the system. You're introducing error into your holds where there really shouldn't be any error. That should be a really accurate thing, and that's yet again another reason I like first focal plane rifle scopes for this kind of work, because then you don't have to worry about what your magnification is set at. You can hold for elevation or wind no matter what your power setting. Now, at least one benefit with having your magnification at 10x being the mil correct magnification is that's an acceptable magnification range if you're shooting moving targets at say 500 yards. At our local matches, when we're shooting movers off the 500-yard berm, 10 power is usually where I set my first focal plane scopes because it gives me a nice wide view, and when I'm tracking the targets, I'm using holds in the reticle. So with a first focal plane scope, it doesn't matter. Anywhere I leave that magnification ring, the reticle is correct. In this one, it has to be on 10 for that reticle to be correct. So should you choose to use the reticle for holds on moving targets, and I recommend you do. There's really no better way to engage moving targets. You need the reticle to be correct, so it's got to be on 10 power. So there's a little bit of a compromise in there, but the compromise works out in one specific situation. Now let's talk about the reticle itself, because this is the other point where I ran into some confusion. Millett calls the reticle in this scope a Dot Bar Reticle. Now we're used to seeing Dot reticles. Dot reticles going all the way back to the Marine Corps 10X scopes have a standard thin stadia line, and then they have dots placed on those stadia lines. Those dots are naturally at 1 mil increments. So the first dot you come to is a 1 mil dot, the next dot you come to is 2 mil dot, and so on and so forth. So it makes it very quick, very intuitive. Well, when companies started going forward and realized that 1 mil is really too coarse, especially when you start to do long range shooting, they started to subdivide those mils with some other kind of indicators in there. The most common is a bar set at 5/10 of a mil. So coming out of the center of the reticle, you would first come to a mark that's a bar across the stadia line, and you would know that's 1/2 mil. Next you would come to a dot, and that would be your full mil. Next you would come to another bar, that would be 1.5 mils. Come to another dot, that's your 2 mil dot, and so on and so forth until you run out of dots on the reticle. Very intuitive, very common. Weaver does that with their enhanced dot reticle. When I first got behind the scope and looked through it, I saw the center of the reticle, a bar, then a dot, a bar, and then a dot, so on and so forth. So if you have a lot of time on rifle scopes, you naturally look at that and assume that that bar is 1/2 mil, 5/10 of a mil. That's not the case. What Millett instead decided to do is make that bar 1 mil and make that dot after it 2 mils, and then the next bar 3 mils, and then the dot 4 mils. So you're alternating bars and dots to indicate the same increment in the reticle. Something you got to stop and think about. It's not intuitive, it's not natural. It's not natural for the things that denote the increments to switch but still maintain the same increment. It's something that will confuse you if you jump on the scope quickly and try to go. Now, once I got that figured out, then it was quick for us to get the scope sighted in. The reticle and the turrets do correspond, so we were able to zero it out just by measuring our offset with the reticle and then dialing the correction in the turrets. Again, when you're measuring the offset of your shot holes to get the scope zeroed, you have to be on 10 power. You can't zero the scope at 16 power unless you shoot at 16 power, dial back to 10 to get your measurement for your offset, and then go back up to 16 for your next shot. So it's a little bit confusing. You basically end up using the scope on 10 power most of the time. When we come up to the turrets add another confusing factor into it. Now thankfully the turrets are graduated in 1/10 mil clicks, so every click is 1/10 of a mil. The turrets are marked 0, and then the next marking is 0.5 mils, then 1, and then 1.5, so on and so forth. And that's pretty standard. What's not standard is when we come all the way around to the turret, the last marking is 5, and then we're back to our 0 5/10 of a mil later. So one revolution on the scope is 5.5 mils. This doesn't make sense. Most scopes are either 5 mil revs or 10 mil revs. And the reason for this is we're used to working with the decimal system. It's easy to remember 1 rev is 5, 2 revs is 10, 3 revs is 15, 4 revs is 20, so on and so forth. Furthermore, when you spin past, it's easy for you to remember on a 5 mil per rev turret that 1 on your second rev is 6, 2 is 7. That's simple. With this scope, when you're on your second rev, that 1 is 6.5. 2 is 7.5. When you get on your second rev, that 0 is now 11. Whereas with a 5 mil, when you're on 0 on your second rev, it's 10. 0, 10. 1, 11. 2, 12. Easy to remember. So again, here's another factor that you have to think about while you're doing this. The Windage Turret is the same. It's 5.5 mils per rev, and it gets even more confusing on the Windage Turret because if you decide to dial left, that first mark says 5, but it's actually 5/10 left. So we're getting all kinds of confusing factors in here. It's even confusing me when I'm trying to explain it to you. So not a real good feature. And making the turrets difficult to use and making the reticle difficult to use really doesn't give you a choice between one or the other. I've run into scopes before where the turrets may be a little bit confusing, the way they lock, the way they unlock, the way they turn, or they may not have real tactile adjustments. And I say, okay, we're just going to use this scope to do holdovers. If the reticle's jacked up, you don't really want to use the scope to do holdovers. You want to dial. If you're dialing all the time, you want turrets that are clear and concise and work intuitively. These do not. Now, one added feature that Millett put on here is these turrets are locking turrets. There's this little knurled ring underneath here that when you turn it and tighten it down, it will lock the turret. The turret doesn't rotate. You have to unlock it to be able to turn the turret again. That's a nice feature because when you get it zero, you can lock it in, no problems. Adjusting the zero when you need to zero the turrets back out, there's just a center screw. Remove the center screw, pull the turret up, turn it to where you need to be, push it back down, tighten the screw back down, you're good to go. So zeroing is fairly simple to slip the turrets back to zero. On the back side here, we have a great big parallax knob. It worked fine. Parallax adjusts down to 10 yards to infinity, which is really nice. I like parallax that adjusts up close because it's great for dry fire. It's great to be able to use this on a 22 trainer because you can get that up close focus. So if you're shooting at 50 yards, you can get a nice clear sight picture. So that's good. The turret moves freely. We didn't have any problems even in cold weather using or turning it with gloves. A disadvantage is though, because it turns freely and because it's a big Mongo turret, if you drag the scope across something, it's going to roll that turret. Now, what I will frequently do when I'm shooting multiple targets and I'm shooting and moving is I'll pick a parallax setting that I think will apply to the majority of the targets out there, either midway between it or I'll pick it just a little bit past the closest target, and I'll leave my parallax turret set at that while I shoot the entire array of targets. With this one, because it's so easy to move, it would be real easy to grab your rifle, pick it up as you're going from one firing point to another and rolling that turret. This can cause you a pretty big problem because you get to the next target, you drop down and find out that you're ready to engage your 500-yard target and your parallax is on 10. Not a great situation to be in. This reticle is an illuminated reticle. The illumination, we didn't spend a whole lot of time with it, but what it appeared to us is like most lower cost illuminated reticles, it blooms on the brightest settings. It really doesn't have a low enough low setting to be really useful for any kind of low light engagement type situations. The best use I can think of for one of these scopes is on a 22 trainer. If you got a 22 trainer out there and you can drop $300 for a scope for it, this may be a good option because of the close focus on the parallax, because of the magnification range, and because it is a second focal plane scope. You can set up the reticle size in relation to the turret to correspond to the sight picture that you want for training. So that keeps you from shooting a close range target and having your reticle massive on it. You can change the power setting to get the reticle to appear the same relationship to the target as you would on your match rifle shooting full power ammunition at long distance targets. So that's an option. That's really about the only good option I can see with it. If you're using the scope to go plink on a nice lazy day at the range, you're probably going to be fine because you have time to think about all the things you need to think about to make the scope work. If you're going to try to jump behind this scope and run and gun with it, you're going to have a lot of problems. You're going to get tripped up. It's going to take a lot of brain power to make sure that you're concentrating on making the scope do what it needs to do. This is not what we want in any kind of support gear for a long-range weapon system. We really want it to work intuitively. We want to just be able to drop down behind it and know how it functions, and we don't want to have to devote a lot of brain power to working the scope. We need to devote brain power to gauging the wind. We need to devote brain power to locating the targets and to keep the shooting problem foremost in our mind, not how to run the equipment. So that's my view on it. Agree or disagree? If you got any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you like this video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, Get out and shoot!